So thanks very much for Paul for this opportunity to relay some messages from Horizon 2020 projects. Let me start my time. I'm going to do it in 3 steps. First, I suggest we have a quick look backwards, then that we look under Horizon 2020. So Horizon 2020 is the European Research and Innovation Framework Program, what we have in there, and then that we look ahead at the main messages that we have from some of these projects that could be of interest to the vision. So first, we've seen already today that a lot of you have thought when the vision was announced, come on, we've been there before, why a vision again? Let's act instead. Huh? So this, which is very prominent. And well, that's true. Some of things have been done before, and it's good to remember and start from them or dismiss them because it's not relevant anymore, but just to take a look. So FARO, the Foresight analysis of rural areas of Europe, for example, was done from 2007 to 2009, and they did similar things as the ones we plan to do again. And because rural areas are diverse and various trends are not going to affect them in the same way, they first characterize rural diversity. So for that, they screened a wide range of indicators and retained 3 that were most relevant to structure a typology. We have economic density, we had accessibility, and environmental zones. And what they did is they combined the first 2 into nine classes, and then 3 different types of rural areas: deep rural, rural, and peri-urban. That relates to the typology that OECD has mentioned too, of course, but maybe in a bit of a different perspective. And then they combined these with the 5 clusters of environmental zones, and that led to this typology of 15 different types of rural areas. So the story is not going to be the same for every one of these different colors there on the map. On that basis, what they have done is they had also looked at trends that seemed most relevant for rural areas at the time. Demography, employment, land use were there, economic diversification was there, energy and quality of life and climate were already there as land use change as well. And well, their main findings from looking at the trends was there's no unifying declining trend in rural areas. Okay, we know that, but good to remember that some are doing better than others. And then from the scenario work they did, picking policy as the main driver for structuring the scenario, they found out that non-agricultural trends in rural areas appeared more relevant in shaping rural future than agricultural processes. So already 15 years ago. So 1 year after the end of FARO came Volante, that ended 5 years ago, and built 3 land use scenarios with the same time horizon of 2040 as we're trying to do now. And in these scenarios, the dividing line was not policy like in FARO, but it was specialization versus diversification, which can be the result of policy, but also of other drivers and trends. So the first scenario was called Best Land in Europe. It was about maximizing land use efficiency at the EU level, which included quite a range of specialization of territories. The second one was regional connected, where the societal needs are met rather at regional level. So regional needs met at regional level, so with globalization playing a lesser role. And the third one was local multifunctional, where multifunctionality is achieved at local or even field scale. So at local level, we try to meet the demands of and the needs of people locally. So which one, in your opinion, was better for rural viability? Well, quite clearly, the last one was considered to be more positive for rural vitality. I think these scenarios are probably still valid today, but we may interpret the likeliness of them differently than we did 5 years ago. So it's good to have them in mind. So that was the past. Now, what do we have at hand? Here's the landscape. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all of this, but this is the landscape of Horizon 2020 rural projects. So rural in the sense that they go beyond farming. They look really at rural communities in general. We have 16 there. All their logos are clickable and will take you to their websites. So I invite you to discover them because all of them have something to say for the vision. It's a bit too much for today. So for today, we'll focus on Foresight. We're trying to move a bit to this afternoon already. On Foresight, we have mostly 7 projects. 2 are on generation renewal and the future of rural communities and jobs. That's ruralization and polyrural there on the left. We have Desira on the impact of digitalization on rural and farming. And then we have 3 that did some envisioning exercise as part of their work on rural-urban linkages or land-sea interactions. That's robust and coastal. And Moving is going to do Foresight on mountains, but only in 2 years' time. So not on time for the vision, but they will do it. And in the middle there, we have Sherpa, who we have heard already, on science, society, policy interfaces, whose mission is to draw on past research to conduct dialogue with rural communities and inform future policies. I'm going to talk only about 3 of these projects because I don't have so much time. So first, POLIRURAL, interestingly, has worked on identifying 64 drivers of change that are relevant now for rural areas using the STEEPV approach. So STEEPV stands for society, technology, economy, environment, politics, and values. I've just picked some examples there so you can see what goes under each column. And if we compare to what we had in Faro, for example, we see that a lot of drivers are common, like demographics or employment opportunities under economy, or the common agricultural policy under politics. But also some of these drivers are clearly changed in importance. They have accelerated or are under a completely new light due to recent developments. For example, the Green Deal under politics, or things related to disaster and recovery plans, or things related to activism and COVID, concerns for health, or digital transformation is really accelerated. Among these, the work package leader in these projects thinks that the following are going to be the most important for rural futures. The impact of the pandemic, which really cuts across, the impact of the of climate change on the economy, the inclusion of farming in the carbon economy, the Green Deal and the new delivery model for the common agricultural policy, and finally, the counterflow of people from urban to rural areas and things related to activism and interest in the cooperative economy. Our Sherpa project, who aims again at building on the outcomes of past research, is done a review of previous foresights and scenarios. And in the ones that they have selected, these ones as the most relevant for rural areas, we see also that these things are very prominent. Localism as a driver, the counterflow of people from urban to rural, and this activism and interest in cooperative economy comes here again as a main trend or driver. In their review, they also looked at the trends and found out again which ones are the most relevant for rural. So demography comes here again, but also these global shifts in production and rise of emerging economies that Enrique Garcilaso has talked about. And these can have positive or negative impacts on rural economies, depending on their capacity to capture investments and market shares in these shifts. And part of that capacity may depend on how well they can benefit from the technological breakthroughs that are coming in farming and forestry especially, but also in other domains. Climate change is of utmost importance, as well as all environmental pressures. And this will drive governments to look for integrated frameworks for how to address these in policy areas, they think. They conclude their review by proposing 4 angles to think about the vision: growth, equity, nature, and well-being, insisting very much again on the fact that rural areas differ in their situation and performance with regard to these 4 elements, in particular depending on their remoteness, and again that rural-urban linkages are really key. They've been also interacting with multi-actor platforms on the ground, and these first discussions, I don't have time to tell you about this, but again, demography, climate, and digitalization come very prominently together with the need to center the vision around social inequalities and solving that problem. We've talked about rural-urban linkages at a lot since this morning already, and it's even more a torture to have just 30 seconds to talk to you about Robust, which is a very, very nice project working on urban-rural synergies under Horizon 2020. They have a lot to say, and some are in the group, so they will compensate. Of course, one of their main messages is that the boundaries between urban and rural have blurred, that they're fuzzy, and that you need to think in terms of relational space and the connections between them. So that's very important. They work on 5 functional linkages between urban and rural areas. And across these 5, they have identified 6 domains in which innovation could benefit or enhance rural-urban synergies. And these are around new approaches to economy. So we bounce on Marjorie's comment, proximity economy, circular economy, or in general, they see that a sustainable well-being economy is on the rise in the 11 localities in which they work. Governance is a field where innovation can bring a lot of benefits as well. They talk about networked governance, territorial governance, new governance arrangements for natural resources, and of course, innovations in the provision of public services in rural areas and around heritage-led tourism are both important for the connection, but also for the well-being of rural areas. And this project really sits in the middle of this COVID crisis, looking at the impact of this on the perception of urban-rural relations, and it has both positive and negative impacts that need to be looked at. So to draw it to a close, if we bring it together, we see really some commonalities in the messages that come from these projects. Demography was there as a central drivers before, it still remains, including aging and decline, but also this return to rural areas, this lifestyle migration. So we can ask ourselves, is a ruralization wave plausible? That's a good question for our Foresight exercise. The aspiration to different forms of economy with a focus on social and environmental values and well-being. Were there also, but the sense of urgency has really increased and policies are accelerating on that front as well. So will this aspiration be met, and what will be the consequences for rural areas is a question that these projects are working on. What will be the balance between globalization and this localism? That will play a role as well. Volante told us that this may affect the future of rural areas quite a lot. As will the breadth and pace of technological change, that's quite central, the progress in the governance, in particular the governance of rural-urban relations, and this activism and support for the collaborative economy, cooperative economy, that were not in the drivers listed in the past project or not so prominently. So of course, policy has a major role to play in many of these drivers, in enhancing many of these drivers. Hence, the need to refresh our vision, taking into account everything that has changed to better chart the course of action, but we should act as well at the same time. Thank you very much.